The development of the nuclear industry in the world occurred in the first half of the 20th century. This field of human activity brought many benefits, but also caused significant harm. Perhaps the most well-known industrial disaster occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986. However, it was far from the only large-scale tragedy of this nature. In this video, I have compiled for you a selection of some of the most horrific and serious technological disasters of the 20th century. The Bhopal disaster is the deadliest industrial catastrophe in history in terms of human casualties. Approximately 18,000 people lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands were left permanently disabled. Let's delve into the events of the night of December 2nd, 1984, to understand what happened and why so many lives were lost. The story of the Bhopal disaster began in 1970 when a pesticide manufacturing plant owned by the large American corporation Union Carbide was established in Bhopal, the capital of Madhya Pradesh, India. The Indian government approved the construction as part of a program to attract foreign investments into local industries. The Bhopal plant produced 7, a pesticide containing methyl isocyanate, MIC. This organic compound is extremely hazardous. Exposure can be lethal. It is also highly flammable and explosive. At the plant, MIC was stored in 3 large underground tanks, each capable of holding up to 60,000 liters of liquid. When the plant began operations, pesticide production seemed like a profitable business. Indian newspapers advertised Siberian, promising bountiful harvests that would end hunger and poverty. However, reality proved different, as crop yields depended not only on pest control, but also on weather conditions. During the severe droughts of the 1980s, farmers found chemical pesticides entirely useless without crops to protect. As a result, demand for Siberian plummeted, and the plant frequently sat idle. By 1984, the Bhopal plant was put up for sale but failed to attract buyers. Operations continued, but the American management refused to invest any funds, even for repairing worn-out equipment. This neglect left all safety systems inoperative, a severe violation, especially given the plant's use of highly dangerous MIC. Thus, the entire population of Bhopal was at risk in the event of an accident, which ultimately occurred. On the night of December 2nd, 1984, water entered tank 610 containing 42 tons of MIC. The exact cause remains unknown, but experts speculate it may have happened during pipe cleaning when a valve restricting water flow into the MIC tank was not fully closed. The water initiated an exothermic chemical reaction. As the MIC heated, pressure inside the tank increased. Operators noticed the rising pressure but could do nothing since all safety systems were disabled. An hour and a half later, the tank ruptured, releasing the MIC and its decomposition products as a massive gas cloud. The toxic cloud, no higher than 5 meters above the ground, traveled at about 5 kilometers per hour, seeping into every home in its path. Tragically, many residential areas were located close to the plant, contributing to the staggering death toll. That night, people in the cloud's path awoke to choking sensations and searing pain in their eyes. MIC's toxic effects primarily target mucous membranes, particularly the lungs and eyes. Victims experienced excruciating pain before succumbing to the gas. Only those who remained asleep or lived far from the plant had a chance to survive. Survivors later recounted the horrors of that night in interviews. Most witnessed the deaths of their loved ones. They described the thick white cloud enveloping their homes, not knowing its nature but desperately fleeing to save their children, whose lungs succumbed to the toxin more quickly. People abandoned their homes and possessions, trying to hold their breath as long as possible while feeling as though they were burning from the inside. On the night of December 2nd, approximately 4,000 people died from the toxic cloud. Over the next 2 weeks, another 10,000 succumbed to gas poisoning. The exact number of survivors left permanently disabled is unknown. The disaster's effects are still felt today, as Bhopal residents frequently give birth to children with rare genetic disorders and mutations. The Bhopal disaster remains terrifying due to the sheer number of casualties, But the horror extends beyond the explosion itself. The actions of Union Carbide's management revealed inhumanity and disregard for life. When the threat of a tank rupture was discovered, they refused to inform the public or assist in evacuating the city. Even after the explosion, they withheld the chemical composition of the released gas, citing trade secrets. This left overwhelmed hospitals in Bhopal unable to provide effective treatment for the blinded and suffocating victims. It's devastating to think how many lives could have been saved if Union Carbide's leadership had acted responsibly and helped mitigate the crisis. In the 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, the U.S. Armed Forces implemented a project called the Distant Early Warning Line System. This project involved the installation of several radar stations along the Arctic Circle to warn of potential Soviet attacks. While effective in concept, the project had its drawbacks. The main challenge was maintaining and refueling diesel boilers and generators in such remote locations. To address this issue, the U.S. Armed Forces decided to install low-power nuclear reactors capable of operating for extended periods with minimal intervention, thereby reducing the logistical burden on these outposts. The Army Reactor Branch developed guidelines for this purpose, and Argonne National Laboratory was chosen to design, assemble, and test these reactors. A prototype low-power reactor, SL-1, was built at the National Reactor Testing Station in Idaho in 1958. It was maintained by specially trained military personnel. The SL-1 reactor was housed in a cylindrical steel building that was not designed to contain high pressure, as it was located far from populated areas. The reactor was rated for a thermal energy output of 3 megawatts, although its core was capable of generating higher power. On December 21, 1960, the SL-1 reactor was shut down for scheduled maintenance. The main operator team went on leave, and 3 technicians took over the duty. Their mistake would lead to a serious accident that the U.S. government initially tried to keep quiet. On January 3, 1961, at 9:01 p.m., the technicians were tasked with restarting the reactor. They needed to manually lift the central control rod no more than 4.1 inches, 10.5 centimeters. However, the rod was lifted approximately 20 inches, 50 centimeters. This error caused the central rod to move beyond its safe level, and the reactor immediately went into a state of criticality. Within just 4 milliseconds, so much heat was generated that all the water in the reactor core instantly vaporized. This led to an extremely concentrated steam explosion. The explosion was so powerful that the reactor vessel, weighing nearly 12 tons, was thrown over 8 feet, 2.5 meters, into the air. Control rods and other components were also ejected and embedded into the ceiling of the building. The explosion instantly knocked down reactor operator John Burns and trainee Richard Leroy McKinley. Burns died immediately from his injuries, while McKinley was critically wounded. The third person at the site, Navy electrician Richard Legg, was also severely injured. Emergency alarms alerted firefighters to the reactor accident. They arrived at the site 9 minutes after the explosion. Upon inspecting the station, the firefighters saw no signs of fire but noticed a cloud of steam rising from the reactor building. Radiation measurements revealed a significant exceedance of safe levels, making it clear that a major incident had occurred. Wearing respirators, the firefighters entered the building and detected radiation levels of 200 Roentgens near the reactor area. When their Geiger counter reached 500 Roentgens, they deemed it too dangerous to proceed and evacuated the building. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission was informed, and 2 personnel responsible for the reactor operation made the risky decision to enter the site to search for survivors. Inside, they found the lifeless body of John Burns and the unconscious McKinley. Richard Legg was later discovered pinned to the ceiling by one of the control rods. He was already dead. McKinley was transported to a hospital, but could not be saved. All 3 technicians ultimately perished in the explosion. A special investigative team, including experts from the Atomic Energy Commission and the U.S. Department of Defense, was formed to determine the cause of the accident. Initially, it was believed that an abnormal chemical reaction caused the explosion, but rapid neutron activation indicated an operational failure. The investigation revealed that the reactor, designed for a 3 MW output, momentarily surged to 20 GW, a power level over 6,000 times its safe operating limit. This indicated that the central control rod had been fully withdrawn. But why? Was it accidental? And if so, how could trained personnel make such a catastrophic error? Unfortunately, this remains the main mystery of the incident. The events of that fateful night at the National Reactor Testing Station had far-reaching consequences. Although the SL-1 building contained most of the radioactivity, iodine-131 levels in nearby downwind facilities were 50 times above the background level during monitoring days. Almost 800 people involved in the cleanup and disposal of radioactive waste were exposed to harmful radiation levels. Many later developed cancer as a result. Who could have imagined that a revolutionary technology intended to be an unlimited and safe energy source at low cost would become the cause of a major industrial disaster? This incident was the first nuclear accident in U.S. history. The Ulba plant, located in Kazakhstan, in Ust-Kamenogorsk, was founded in 1949. At that time, Kazakhstan was part of the USSR. The idea of creating this facility arose in the early 1940s after the Soviet government learned about the development of atomic weapons in the United States. The atomic project was led by the renowned Soviet physicist Igor Kurchatov, one of the pioneers of the peaceful use of nuclear energy. The Soviet project was entirely classified. Initially, the plant produced thorium, a heavy, slightly radioactive metal. 2 years later, production shifted to beryllium, tantalum, and uranium. Today, the plant's primary focus is on manufacturing fuel pellets for nuclear power plants. In 1990, the Ulba metallurgical plant experienced a serious industrial accident, the details of which remain classified to this day. Information about this incident was pieced together thanks to the efforts of emergency responders and residents of Ust-Kamenogorsk. On September 12, 1990, the weather in Ust-Kamenogorsk was pleasant. That morning, people went to work as usual, and children attended schools and kindergartens. None of them suspected that in just a few hours, the entire city would be gripped by fear. By midday, rumors began spreading among the locals about a major accident at the metallurgical plant. Denis Danilevsky, a teacher at school number 29, recalls that the school administration was instructed to close all windows and send children home after notifying their parents. However, no details about the incident or its reasons were provided. The bus route that Danilevsky took home passed by the plant. He recounted that he intentionally observed the plant's premises from the bus window, but everything appeared calm on the surface. Only those working inside the plant and the firefighters knew the true extent of the disaster. Inside, chaos was unfolding. At 10:20 a.m., a report came into the communications center of Fire Brigade No. 40 about a fire in Workshop 3A, located in Building No. 662 at the Ulba metallurgical plant. A fire crew, including 2 engine companies and a chemical extinguishing vehicle led by the shift commander, was dispatched to the scene. The situation was critical since classified substances were being handled in this building. For this reason, the fire station chief also went to the site. Within 5 minutes, firefighters arrived at the premises where the fire had broken out. Entering the building, they discovered that the glass blocks of light wells in the beryllium products warehouse and on the second floor had been completely shattered, and ventilation systems and equipment were engulfed in flames. Every second counted, but just a minute later, an explosion occurred in the wet grinding area for beryllium. 4 minutes later, Senior Deputy Officer Vladimir Yuryevich Pobrus of the Ust-Kamenogorsk Fire Brigade arrived on the scene. By then, 12 fire crews were already involved in the firefighting operation. At 10:35 a.m., another explosion shook the building, destroying windows, partitions, air ducts, and some equipment. Most alarming was the release of beryllium dust that had accumulated in an underground exhaust duct. Fires began breaking out throughout the building, and there was a growing risk of flames spreading to an adjacent building. Thanks to the firefighters' heroic efforts, the fire in the building was localized by 11:34 a.m. It seemed the worst was over. But less than an hour later, at 12:23 p.m., a powerful explosion occurred in building number 615. This explosion released more beryllium dust and powder into the atmosphere and threatened new fires and explosions. Firefighters resumed combating the new outbreaks, and by 6:49 p.m., the fire across all plant buildings was finally extinguished. A total of 127 firefighters from the Ust-Kamenogorsk Brigade participated in this challenging operation, using 21 specialized firefighting vehicles. The following day, the firefighting equipment was washed several times with a special solution, but even after that, the beryllium concentration remained thousands of times higher than permissible levels. Medical professionals from Moscow examined the firefighters involved in the response. After conducting tests, they reassured the responders that their lives and health were not in danger. However, this was far from the truth. The doctors knew that such a high concentration of beryllium was extremely hazardous. The cause of the fire at the Ulba metallurgical plant remains a mystery, as information about the accident is still classified. Some experts believe that the fire may have been caused by sparks or molten metal droplets from welding operations in building number 66 igniting beryllium powder accumulated in an underground ventilation duct. This incident could have had far more catastrophic consequences due to the plant's high level of secrecy. Later, Vladimir Yuryevich Pobrus, senior deputy officer of the Ust-Kamenogorsk Fire Brigade, shared that none of the 127 firefighters knew about the dangerous substances stored at the facility. The plant's management maintained strict secrecy about the workshop's activities. Only thanks to the workers' warnings about the presence of beryllium were the firefighters able to prevent a massive explosion of the entire facility, potentially saving thousands of lives. Interestingly, the residents of Ust-Kamenogorsk only learned about the true scale of the disaster years later. On the day of the accident, a brief announcement stated that a minor incident had occurred at the plant, and there was no cause for concern. The Krasnoye Sormovo plant, located in Nizhny Novgorod, formerly Gorky, is one of Russia's largest shipbuilding enterprises. During the Soviet era, the plant secretly constructed nuclear submarines. One of the worst incidents in its history occurred on January 18, 1970. This large-scale industrial disaster was kept classified, and the information only became public 25 years later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union. On Sunday, January 18, 1970, the plant was conducting hydraulic tests on the K-320 nuclear submarine, the seventh vessel in the Project 670 SCAT series. These submarines were designed to destroy aircraft carriers. Before the tests, workers had to perform a routine task, filling the reactor system with cold water to check for leaks. This required replacing plastic plugs with metal ones. Although this procedure was standard, a critical mistake was made on that day, leading to irreversible consequences. Construction of the submarine was being rushed, forcing workers to take shifts on weekends and work extra hours without adequate pay. This likely contributed to the accident. In their haste, workers responsible for reactor preparation forgot to replace the plugs. Predictably, the plastic plugs failed under pressure, resulting in an unauthorized reactor startup. Approximately 10 seconds later, the reactor was destroyed. The reactor's destruction released a massive column of water over 50 meters high, followed by radioactive steam. Although the reactor operated for only 10 seconds, it generated a lethal radiation field in the workshop. Radiation levels reached 60,000 Roentgens, and the total release of radiation was estimated at 75,000 curies. At the time of the accident, about 200 workers were in the workshop. 12 died instantly, and the rest, exposed to the radioactive release, were urgently transported to Moscow to the same hospital that would later treat firefighters involved in the Chernobyl disaster 16 years later. Many of these workers succumbed to their injuries in the following months. When news of the disaster reached the Soviet government, it was decided to keep the incident entirely secret. According to plant employees, some only learned of the radiation release years later. Engineer Vitaly Voitenko recalled in interviews that when he and his colleagues arrived at work on Monday, the day after the accident, they were sent on a 3-day leave. During this time, the plant's management changed access passes, and the affected workshop became completely restricted. Most employees from the mechanical assembly workshop, where the disaster occurred, were informed about the incident because their labor was needed to mitigate the consequences. However, they were sworn to secrecy and prohibited from discussing the incident even with their families. Vitaly Voitenko, listed as one of the accident liquidators, later founded a public organization called January 1970, advocating for the recognition of liquidators' contributions at the federal level. Thanks to his efforts, details of the mitigation process came to light, and they were horrifying. At the time, people were poorly informed about the dangers of radiation. Workers were not provided with respirators or protective suits. Instead, they cleaned the workshop wearing simple gauze masks and rubber gloves. The primary tools for addressing this severe disaster were buckets, mops, and rags. After each cleaning session, radiation levels were checked, and if they did not decrease, the workers repeated the process. Contaminated water was dumped directly into the Volga River. Workers spent hours in the contaminated zone daily, receiving meager pay. Meanwhile, behind a nearby wall, construction of another submarine continued, involving over 1,500 shipbuilders. The wall was presumed to shield workers from radiation, but the workshops shared ventilation and water systems, exposing these workers to radiation as well. A total of about 1,000 people participated in the mitigation efforts, achieving what seemed impossible. They cleaned the submarine of radioactive contamination, and engineers replaced the damaged reactor 4 days ahead of the deadline. The nuclear submarine was delivered on time. But at what cost? Every one of the 1,000 liquidators developed radiation sickness and became first- or second-degree invalids. By January 2005, just 25 years after the incident, only 380 liquidators were still alive, and by 2021, fewer than 200 remained. None received government recognition or awards. However, the plant's director, Mikhail Yurev, was awarded the title Hero of Socialist Labor and the Order of Lenin for meeting the state order deadlines. 2 years later, he received the USSR State Prize. The liquidators' efforts prevented contamination of the surrounding area and the city of Gorky. Residents were never informed about the disaster or the Volga River's contamination. The local authorities imposed a swimming ban, attributing it to a cholera outbreak. How many people ignored the ban and swam in the contaminated water remains unknown. In 1949, the Soviet government decided to construct a major nuclear industry facility in the Tomsk region, known as the Siberian Chemical Combine. The facility's construction was fully completed in 1954. Today, it comprises 4 nuclear industry enterprises. The isotope separation plant began operations in 1953. Its primary focus is the production of enriched uranium for nuclear energy, as well as the extraction of stable isotopes of xenon, tin, and other chemical elements. The second enterprise, the sublimate plant, was commissioned in 1954. It now specializes in processing uranium-containing products. 2 other enterprises were launched after the 1960s. The radiochemical plant produces pure compounds of natural uranium, while the chemical metallurgical plant handles the smelting and processing of plutonium, manufacturing components for nuclear weapons, as well as producing magnetic alloys and ultrafine powders. Today, the Siberian Chemical Combine is a hallmark of Siberia and one of Russia's key facilities meeting the uranium needs of nuclear power plants. However, the Combine's history includes a horrific incident that is rarely mentioned. On April 6, 1993, around 12 p.m. local time, operators at the radiochemical plant noticed a significant pressure increase in one of the uranium and plutonium extraction apparatuses. 50 minutes later, during a shift change, workers reported the issue to the duty engineer technologist. This news raised alarm, as the steel vessel in the southern wing of Building 201's Shop 1 contained a solution that had undergone at least one cycle of plutonium extraction. The solution included approximately 9,000 kilograms of uranium, 238, 500 grams of plutonium, 239, and beta-active fission products. The duty engineer technologist decided to release the pressure through adjacent apparatuses via the technological lines. However, all attempts to stabilize the pressure failed. By 12:55, the pressure reached 5 atmospheres, and 3 minutes later it surged to 20 atmospheres. The steel vessel's walls were designed to withstand a maximum pressure of 12 atmospheres. Predictably, the extraction apparatus could not endure this stress, and at 12:58, a powerful steam gas explosion occurred. The explosion completely destroyed the vessel containing the hazardous solution, as well as the ceiling of the apparatus hall, the workshop's windows, and the standard ventilation system. Firefighters arrived promptly and extinguished the fire in just 10 minutes. However, significant amounts of plutonium and other radioactive substances were released into the atmosphere through the damage in the building, leading to unavoidable consequences. Radioactive contamination affected not only the radiochemical plant's territory, but also the surrounding coniferous forests. At the time of the radioactive release, a southwesterly wind carried radionuclides in a direction with relatively few nearby populated areas, except for the village of Georgievka. At the time of the accident, Georgievka had a population of 73 people, including 18 children. Additionally, about 100 vacationers were in the village that day. Residents were exposed to radiation levels of 60 microroentgens per hour, while the safe threshold is considered to be 50 microroentgens per hour. The combine purchased meat products from the residents, provided vegetables, fruits, and animal feed, and offered monetary compensation to all permanent residents. However, the compensation was insufficient for relocation. The residents lost livestock, crops, and, most importantly, suffered significant health damage. Leonid Rykvanov, who chaired the Department of Geology and Exploration of Rare and Radioactive Elements at Tomsk Polytechnic in 1993, shared in interviews that he learned about the incident on the evening of April 6th. The next day, he and his colleagues traveled to Georgievka to conduct further radiation monitoring. The scientists discovered that the spectrum lacked the long-decaying radionuclide cesium-137. After analyzing the details of the radionuclide release, Rykvanov concluded that a true catastrophe was narrowly averted by sheer luck. According to him, if the wind had been stronger or in a different direction, all the hazardous substances would have been carried to Tomsk. At the time, the city had a population of approximately 500,000. The disaster could have been on a much larger scale. Despite the seemingly fortunate outcome, the incident was still severe. This is evidenced by the fact that ruthenium aerosols were detected in atmospheric samples as far as Alaska. The most alarming aspect is that over 2,000 people were exposed to radiation during the accident, including Georgievka residents. Research conducted in 2010 found that all children living in the village showed significantly reduced immunity. Furthermore, local animals continue to produce stillborn offspring, frequently fall ill, and die. So what caused this technological disaster? Why did the pressure in the steel vessel begin to rise? It was determined that the cause was a gross operator error. The operator failed to ensure adequate air supply needed for thorough mixing of the solution before adding nitric acid. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Your support means the world to me. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye.